Hey everybody, this is Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Now. We have a huge show today. We're going to be talking about the Ahmaud Arbery shooting, Tiger King, and also whether or not juries can now hear trials over Zoom. So there's a lot to talk about, but right now where we want to start is with the latest in Lorie Vallow Daybell. Now, this is that Idaho mother who was ultimately charged in connection with the disappearance of her kids. Now, we know they've both been missing since September, 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow and 17-year-old Tylee Ryan. A lot to break down here, including the fact that when we talk about this case, she is on jail on $1 million bond, and her kids, Lorie Vallow's mother and sister have been doing interviews. In fact, there's one that we want to talk about. So Janice Cox, Summer Shiflett, they sat down this past weekend, you might have caught it, with CBS 5's Phoenix Morgan Lowe. Take a look if you haven't seen it.
And maybe she's protecting them from something terrible. I don't know. But I do know that I have faith in her as a mother that she's doing the best she knows how for her children.
Is there any part of the dark recesses of your minds that say, maybe she cracked and maybe this is not going to end up well?
We have gone through those scenarios probably 100 times.
If something has happened to those children, it is not by her doing. And it's not by her permission to do something. There is no way that she did anything to them. There's just no way.
Yeah, we know her well enough to know that. Yeah. We know that.
All right, so I'm here with Morgan Lowe himself, who conducted the interview, as well as executive trial producer Kathy Russin. Morgan, let's just start from that answer itself. What did you make of that answer? What did that mean to you?
Well, what struck me right off the bat is that these people are defending Lorie Vallow. It's her mom and her sister. And that's something that we have not heard this entire time we've been covering this case. But what they did was sort of come up with an alternate scenario. What we've been reporting and what I think the country has been, how the country has been viewing this case is that she did something to those kids. And what they told us is that that's not even possible for her. It's not in her DNA, that there is no way she could have harmed her kids. And so they believe that she is innocent. They believe that the kids are alive and well, although they don't know where they are. But it was fascinating hearing somebody stick up for Lorie Vallow, something we have not heard yet.
Let me ask you the million-dollar question here. Was it your impression that they're hiding something, or that they really don't have more information, which was a big theme that we hear from them, that, look, Lorie can't tell us a lot of things because she's in jail right now. So is it your impression that perhaps they're not being entirely forthcoming, or perhaps they just don't know more of the story at this point?
Yeah, I got the impression from them that they are a mom and a sister who love their family member and just can't believe or refuse to believe that she would do anything wrong. When we press them on, what facts, where could they be? They say they don't know where the kids are. They don't know the full story, but they believe that there is a different part of the story. So no facts to support their position other than they point to her history, couple of decades of being really a model mom, somebody who raised a couple of older kids and then really, took time and care to raise JJ, who, has mental challenges. He's autistic and from all accounts, a bit of a handful, and just loved and doted on her children. And they just can't understand how somebody who spent her life doing that would just change at the last minute, change 1 minute, and then become this cold-blooded child killer. They don't buy it.
This is not the first time that we've heard from Summer Shiflett as well as Janice Cox. They actually sat down for this CBS interview as well, and heard similar flavors to their answers. But in case you haven't seen it, here's another sampling of what they had to say. I believe it was from last week.
He just takes the phone, and he knows who we are.
She can't tell us.
Why not?
She's in jail. She's not gonna, everything's recorded. She can't discuss anything about the case.
And I'm positive beyond any doubt that she hasn't harmed those kids.
So, Kathy, I want to turn it over to you right now. With family members getting vocal about what's happening, let's turn it over to Joshua's grandmother. Now, I know we have a graphic of this. I want to put it up. So this is actually from Kay Vallow Woodcock, Joshua's grandmother. And she said, this is directed towards Chad Daybell, who's Lorie Vallow's current husband. Chad, you have the power to stop this now. Lorie has lied, and now is the time for you to speak out. If this situation continues, you will truly wish you could portal your way off Earth. Another galaxy won't be far enough to keep you safe. If you think your darling wife won't start singing to save her hide once you're both in jail, think again. You have no idea who you married. We don't know what's happened to the Lorie we knew, but she is gone. Kathy, what's your impression, your reaction to what we just read?
Yeah, that's right. And that's just a small portion of that Facebook post she put. She wanted it made public. She wanted everyone to share it. She was appealing to Chad Daybell to do the right thing and to come forward and say where the kids are. She appealed to him as a grandfather because he has older kids, so he has grandkids. She said, we don't get to hold our grandchild. How can you hold yours? She's angry. You know, she's the one that initiated the whole welfare check to begin with. Also, in the interview that Morgan did, Lorie's mom and sister think Lorie's hiding the kids because she was being threatened, and specifically named Kay Woodcock, saying that Charles Vallow's family was threatening them, and they think that she may be hiding the kids because she's trying to protect them.
Morgan, can you speak about this relationship again? I mean, we know that there's an interesting dynamic here. So the relationship here with Charles Vallow's side of the family and Lorie Vallow, I mean, it gets complicated, and you actually need a diagram to chart out everything that you're seeing. But we actually recently learned that apparently Charles Vallow was, filing court documents back in 2006 and was not happy with Lorie. I mean, what can you speak about this family dynamic?
Yeah. So Lorie's family indicate, we're close with her. We never would have thought she could do anything like this. But it's important to point out that none of them ever went to any of her weddings. They never went to any of her marriages. They say that she had bad taste in men, and they actually spoke very highly of Charles Vallow. But they say that about 6 months before Charles died, Lorie had accused him of cheating on her. And they say that at that point, he changed and that he accused her of being in a cult. And that's how all of this came up. And those divorce records that you're talking about are the first glimpses that we have of some sort of, controversy with Lorie speaking bizarrely, talking about telling Charles if she gets in his way, she's going to murder him, and some of this strange language that we've heard attributed to her with this cult situation. So Lorie's parents believe that that's what started this. And then, of course, Charles died in July of last year at the hands of Lorie's own brother, claimed that it was a shooting in self-defense at her rental home here. That case remains under investigation. But the brother, Alex Cox, who pulled the trigger, he died himself a couple of months later. That was recently ruled as natural causes. So we're actually running out of witnesses to what happened during that shooting because Lorie was there. Her 2 children were there. They're missing. Alex and Charles were there.
Right.
And both of them have passed away. Just an odd dynamic here.
Let me ask you, follow up with that. Do you think that with the conclusion that Alex Cox died of natural causes, that puts an end to his investigation into what happened to him? Because I know that was one of the question marks. Well, another unexplained death. But I mean, how does that tie in to the Tammy Daybell investigation, which we know her autopsy was conducted? Her body was actually exhumed. She was the former wife of Chad Daybell. Have you heard any rumblings about how this investigation into these multiple deaths is going to continue now, as we just heard what happened to Alex Cox?
Yeah, that's a real problem with this investigation. I mean, obviously not having him here to ask and to question is the number one problem. There was a lot of speculation that him just dying unexpectedly, there had to have been foul play. The autopsy came back in the toxicology, and they said it was natural causes. So they said no foul play. I am absolutely certain, as we are as a news department are showing those autopsy results to other medical examiners to be able to tell us, is there any way that this could have been the result of a poisoning or something? But at this point, there's no indication that, that that's the case. But it does become a lot more difficult to investigate, Tammy Daybell's death. Her autopsy was conducted. We're told that the toxicology report is taking a little longer than they thought. That could be out any day now. And that is being viewed as a suspicious death. So obviously, toxicology report, what are you looking for? You're looking for drugs and or poison. So obviously investigators are looking into that suspiciously. Whether Alex played a role in that, we have no idea. Obviously the number one, people of interest would be Chad and Lorie at this point.
Right. No, and that's a good point. And look, if you're just joining us, what is the latest of Lorie Vallow Daybell? Well, her bond to have it reduced was denied. And if you haven't seen it, we aired this about a month ago or 3 weeks ago when we covered it live. Take a listen. This is the judge denying a reduction of bond.
I would certainly invite evidence that conversations are being inappropriately recorded between counsel and client of any sort, whether it's Ms. Daybell or anyone else, to be brought to the court's attention. I'm not sure a motion to reduce bond is exactly the way to do that, but certainly we don't want that happening, and I'm confident that the jail will make sure that that doesn't happen. I happen to believe that Mr. Wood and Madison County Sheriff's Office have great motivation to make sure they don't do that in this case or any other, because it is a serious violation of constitutional rights. And if it actually has occurred, as Mr. Means speculates that it might, and I guess what I should say when I say that if it's actually occurring, what I mean is if conversations between an attorney and client without a warning that they're being recorded are actually being recorded, then that would certainly be something that I would want to know about. But I don't really have any evidence that that is actually what is going on here. So on that basis, I'm denying the motion for bond reduction because I cannot find any good cause to reduce bond further than it already has. And I would invite Mr. Means to consult with local defense attorneys who I'm sure have come up with alternatives during this time, and then also have a long track record of dealing with Madison County Jail. I'm aware that different jails can have very different procedures, and I'm confident that there are a number of defense counsel in Madison County that would be willing to talk to Mr. Means about ways to surmount any virus problems at the jail in regards to communicating with clients.
And that's where Lorie remains, jail. Kathy, over to you. What are our viewers' impressions of what's happening in this case? What's their impression of Lorie Vallow Daybell at this point as we keep getting new updates every week?
Well, she's replaced Casey Anthony and Jodi Arias as the most hated woman in America. Viewers are furious because they care about the children and they can't understand why a mother won't produce her children or show any proof of life at all. If she thinks they're in danger, she could still show some kind of proof to the court that they're alive, and she's refusing to do any of it. So I can't find anyone except maybe her family members that are supporting her.
Morgan, final question to you. We have about 30 seconds. I know the preliminary hearing, I believe, is scheduled for July. What can we expect next steps for that? I mean, will her mom and sister appear there as witnesses? I mean, what do we know about the preliminary hearing?
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting because so far, all we've heard are accusations from both sides. Accusations from Lorie Vallow's side that there's, improper recording, and accusations on the prosecutor's side that she did something to the kids. And there's really no evidence either way other than the kids have disappeared. So this preliminary hearing is going to be really the first time where the prosecution has to show some evidence. Show us your hand, show us some
Right.
cards. What do they know that maybe hasn't been reported or that we haven't heard yet? So this is going to be an absolutely significant hearing.
And hopefully it's something that we can cover here live on Law and Crime. Morgan, we appreciate you coming on and giving the latest. When we come back, an interesting development in Tiger King. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. The drama surrounding the wildly popular Netflix series Tiger King continues once again. Carole Baskin, one of the central figures in that show, I should say, was married to a man named Don Lewis. He's been missing since 1997, and people believe, there are rumors, that Carole Baskin was involved in the disappearance of her husband. You couple that with the fact that his will left control of his estate and affairs in her hands. And there was a provision in there, highly controversial provision, that said she would gain this authority in the event of his disappearance. Now, our next guest says that the signature, Don Lewis's signature on the will and power of attorney, were traced from the marriage certificate, and the signatures of the witnesses and notary were identical on the will and power of attorney, basically saying that they were copied. So this is big. I want to bring in my guests. I want to bring in first the expert who believes this, handwriting expert Thomas Vastrick, as well as investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell, who's from the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting. Thank you both here for coming on. And also I have with me Kathy Russin. So Thomas, I want to start with you. That's a bombshell right there. What makes you think that this was traced?
Well, the reason for that is you have almost complete replication of multiple signatures, and there's going to be a level of variation between any naturally created signature. And so when I was provided a copy of the will and the power of attorney, it was quite noticeable the lack of variation between all of the Lewis signatures. I was also provided the marriage document, which was dated and recorded with the government 5 years prior to the date of the will and the power of attorney. And I noticed almost exact replication throughout that signature and all the signatures on the will and the power of attorney, to the extent that it was my conclusion and opinion that the signature on the marriage document was the model signature from which all of the other signatures were traced.
Jerry, Susan Aronoff is the attorney who was on that will, and she said originally she was present during the signing, then came forward and said she wasn't. So what do we know about this exactly? Because to have the idea that her signature was traced or she wasn't there, this is really big.
It is big, and I think there's obviously some problems with the will, as Mr. Vastrick mentioned. All the signatures appear to have been copied, like they're identical. Every signature on the will. I mean, not just Don Lewis's, but the two witnesses, basically the notary herself, and so Susan Aronoff, who's one of the witnesses of the will, basically came back and told authorities later, hey, I wasn't even, all of a sudden I get a call from Carole, hey, I need you to testify that I'm not, that you were there when we signed the will. And she was like, well, I didn't even sign it, and this isn't even my signature. And, so it's very interesting. And we'll see what happens with this. Obviously, renewed interest in the case because of Tiger King.
Right. And I want to ask about that. Thomas, have you been contacted by the police, by any authorities at this point? Because, look, I understand that there was a 5-year statute of limitation on the forgery count. I know they might have looked at this back in the day and said, oh, that expired. But currently, in the current investigation, has any authority reached out to you, Thomas, about this?
No, but that's not particularly unusual because law enforcement in the normal procedure would have submitted the documentation to the FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Laboratory in Pensacola for examination in a law enforcement type case like that. So, because I wasn't contacted or one of my other peers contacted isn't necessarily unusual.
Jerry, have you heard a reaction from police about this, the sheriff's office, and even Carole Baskin's camp about this?
I haven't heard any reaction from her, Carole Baskin's camp. She's been very regular in posting videos in reaction to almost everything. So we'll wait and see if she posts something on this. I know that she's maintained the disappearance aspect of the power of attorney was because Don Lewis, her husband at the time, was going to Costa Rica. But almost every attorney that I have spoken to who handles estates basically says, this, they've never seen anything like this.
Right. It's pretty incredible. Kathy, 10 seconds. What do our viewers think about this or this latest development? About 10 seconds.
Oh, 100% they believe Carole Baskin's involved in her husband's disappearance. And I'd say this handwriting is great evidence.
Well, I got to tell you, it just continues the conversation once more. Gentlemen, wish we had more time because I could talk about this all day. Kathy, thank you again. When we come back, we're going to focus on the Ahmaud Arbery shooting. Stay tuned.
Shannon, are you home? Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
Chris Watts just annihilated and buried his entire family.
Chris did not take into account security cameras. He didn't watch enough CSI.
The next door neighbor is showing the surveillance footage of Chris Watts loading up his truck at 5 o'clock in the morning.
It's on video 527.
You told me that she went on a play date. He honestly thought he could fool everyone.
And welcome back, everybody. We want to focus right now on our continued coverage of the Ahmaud Arbery shooting out of Georgia. Now, we know that cell phone footage of this killing led to the arrest of a father and son, Gregory and Travis Mcmichael. They've been charged with murder and aggravated assault. A lot of new developments since our last show. And where we want to start right now is with this new surveillance footage that came out that seemingly showed multiple people coming onto Larry English's property. Now, why is this important? It's important because there is footage of arguably Arbery or someone who appears to be Arbery on this property. And we know that the Mcmichaels originally had said that they thought Arbery was a burglar entering into this property illegally. Now, that's important. I want to go to this footage, and we're going to break down what this means on the other side. Take a look. All right, I'm joined right now by a reporter from WSB-TV, Tony Thomas. Tony, it's great to have you here, and thanks for coming on Law&Crime Now. A lot to break down here, and I want to start with this footage. What do we know about this? Do we have any idea who these people are? I mean, I know that this was obtained from Larry English, but what do we know?
We don't know much. We don't know who the people are. We do know it dates back as far as December. Prior to this shooting on February 23rd down in Brunswick, Georgia. It appears to be some neighborhood kids. There appears to be a couple at one point that walked through. We do have confirmed from the Arbery family that there is video on the 23rd of Ahmaud walking through that same structure. And then there's 2 or 3 clips we did not see there, but 2 or 3 clips of another person walking through at night that you can't tell. It may be Ahmaud, it may be somebody else. These all show that there have been people going through that construction site over the weeks preceding this shooting.
At this point, what has been the reaction to this? And you can look at it 2 ways, right? I mean, from one way, and the way that seems to be very obvious, is all these people were entering the property, and yet it was Ahmaud Arbery who was targeted and shot down. The other way of looking at it, and I'm curious if you've heard any rumblings of this from the defense, is that, well, there were multiple people going on the property. Larry English was possibly concerned about this. And at this point, the Mcmichaels thought that there were burglaries happening. So whether or not it was one person or multiple people, this can support their narrative that they thought there were burglars in the neighborhood. What has been the way people have pieced this surveillance footage together?
It can support their narrative. In fact, late last week, lawyers for the Mcmichaels hinted, at least, at the fact that there could be other videos out there as well. And we do know we uncovered a text sent to Larry English. He uncovered it apparently over the weekend. It's from a Glenn County police officer who had been called on a couple of those occasions of other people trespassing on the property. He sent a text to Larry English saying, hey, if you have any trouble, there's a former law enforcement officer who lives 2 doors down from you, Greg Mcmichael. Give him a call. He'll help you out. So that may even bring in that the police department, and there's that text right there that comes from the lawyer for Larry English, the man who owns that house that is being built. So that brings it even further into question. A lot of this will be debated as this goes through preliminary hearings and the court proceedings in the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, that text message that came out is really interesting because it almost gives the authority to Gregory Mcmichael to intervene. And you could see how new defense counsel, which both Mcmichaels have retained separate counsel, how it might be used. Now, it doesn't mean that it's a justification for what they did in any way, but it does add to this story. And I want to ask you about something else. Haven't we learned that Gregory Mcmichael, the father here, was instrumental in releasing video of the shooting itself?
Yes, so one of my colleagues here at WSB reported on the record just a couple of days ago that, in fact, the leak of that video came from Greg Mcmichael. We knew it had come indirectly from an attorney he had consulted, an attorney he was a friend of. He consulted more as a friend than in a legal aspect. But we have now learned that it came directly from Greg Mcmichael. A lot of turbulent times, the protest in the neighborhood. He wanted to make sure he got the facts straight. So apparently he is the one who released this video, and then things took a dramatic turn after that.
Yeah, he released the video that ultimately led to him and his son's arrest. I want to go to a report that WSB TV did on some additional footage. If you haven't seen it, take a look.
The security camera about a block down from the February shooting scene recorded as a man that appeared to be Ahmaud Arbery walked down the street. Our partners at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution first got this video from a non-GBI source last night and confirmed agents are reviewing it as part of the case. The timestamp appears to be about 1 hour off when it showed a man wearing a white shirt and shorts, again appearing to be Arbery, walk into the open garage of a house under construction, then around back. 6 minutes later, the man can be seen leaving. Then he ran down the street. Nothing appeared to be in his hands. A neighbor can be seen across the street about the same time a 911 call was made.
And he's running right now. There he goes right now.
A short time later, off in the distance, a pickup pulled out in the area of where Greg and Travis Mcmichael live. The Mcmichaels face murder charges after this videotaped confrontation a few seconds later. The Mcmichaels say they were trying to make a citizen's arrest when Arbery fought back and was shot and killed. The Mcmichaels claim self-defense. Arbery's family says he was simply out on a jog.
All right, I want to bring in Brian Buckmeyer from Law&Crime to break down some of these new developments. So, Brian, we didn't have a chance to bring you on earlier to talk about this, but I want to get your perspective now. With the revelation that Gregory Mcmichael was responsible for the release of the shooting tape, with the revelation that multiple people were entering or visiting the Larry English property, and with this new footage coming out, seeing some moments of Ahmaud Arbery before this shooting, is all of this new information helping the defense or hurting them more?
I would say that it's not so much a help or hurt. It's about how much lifting they're going to have to do come trial. They have to really put this to, well, the prosecution has to make it seem like it's about what the Mcmichaels knew. It's not about what we can piece together outside of the video. It's what the Mcmichaels knew. But the defense is going to want to do the opposite and say, hey, all of this is going on. Maybe Mcmichael saw this out of the corner of his eye, saw him running out the street. Maybe he heard this person in the 911 call, you can see in that video, kind of speaking. Maybe he saw it in its entirety, and that's what he acted upon, even though he's not seeing what exactly is in the video. So it all depends on how the lawyers present this information.
And let me ask you, speaking of a legal defense at this point, you heard from the attorneys, and we're going to play it for a little bit. Brian, what's your impression of their initial statements as we've heard them from last week, once both Mcmichaels have retained counsel?
I mean, at this point, their clients are pretty much considered guilty based on the way the media is coming out with this information. They've got to put their stance out there as quickly as possible. I do think it's a dual-edged sword saying, hey, don't rush to judgment, especially when you're considering that a part of this case is the Mcmichaels rushing to judgment of Ahmaud Arbery. Maybe poor choice of words.
So I actually want to go to, I understand. I want to go to actually something that happened last week, I think it was Friday, where we heard from Frank Hogue, who's one of the attorneys for Gregory Mcmichael, made this statement, and we'll talk about the representation afterwards. Take a look.
The truth will reveal that this is not just another act of violent racism. Greg Mcmichael did not commit murder. Greg Mcmichael is not a party to the crime of murder. This is not some sort of hate crime fueled by racism. It is and remains the case, however, that a young African-American man has lost his life to violence. That is tragic.
Okay, so Tony, back to you. What do we know about the lawyers representing the Mcmichaels, if anything?
The lawyers representing Greg Mcmichael are from Macon, which is about an hour south of Atlanta, a husband and wife team. They're still about 3.5 hours outside of Brunswick. None of the legal teams are from the area where this all occurred. The team from the other for Travis Mcmichael is from Metro Atlanta, Decatur, a suburb of Atlanta. Both are well known in the defense circles around Georgia, but neither were involved with the Mcmichaels before this, and neither are from that area of coastal Georgia where this all occurred.
Tony, I want to follow up. I understand that you've spoken, correct me if I'm wrong, you've spoken with Ahmaud Arbery's father. What's he feeling at this point? Because every day, every week, there's new information coming out. What's the latest that you've heard from him?
Part overwhelmed, I think, and part relieved. Overwhelmed because all this has begun happening very, very quickly. You got to understand, they've been living this since February 23rd when this all happened. They've been spent weeks pleading and pleading with local authorities and through 3 different prosecutors for something to move ahead with this case, and nothing ever happened. All of a sudden, this video is released publicly, leaked publicly, and now they are overrun, partly with the relief that something's happening in this case, and partly just trying to handle the crush of media, the crush of friends, the crush of protesters. Their lives have been turned upside down just in the past 2 weeks of all this. Still very angry that nothing was done in the past few weeks up until the Georgia Bureau of Investigations got involved, but relieved finally that something is happening and pushing that the third person who is around all this, the man who took that video, the family definitely wants him charged as well.
Yeah, William Bryan, he obviously says that he doesn't know what his role is. He thinks he's a witness at this point, but said he has no involvement in this, no prior interaction with the Mcmichaels. He was there to take that tape, and ultimately he helped with the Arbery's. Your reaction to his role and what may ultimately happen with him?
Yeah, so that came out, I believe, in a CNN interview. And my reaction, I think, like every other defense attorney, is we had our hands in our face, and we couldn't imagine letting your client make that kind of interview. If I was him, I would stop talking in general. I think that Gregory Mcmichael in the police report kind of outs him as saying at one point in time that William Bryan uses his vehicle to kind of cut off Ahmaud Arbery. To me, that screams acting in concert. It's a very weak argument, but I think one that might pass the grand jury phase. And I do not believe that his statements right now, or lack thereof from that interview, are going to really help him.
It was something to watch. We've played it here on the network, partially on the network, and it was something to watch. So we'll see which way that ultimately goes. Tony Thomas, thank you so much, and appreciate you reporting on this. It's really, really insightful for everybody around the country to hear what's happening. So again, from WSB TV, please follow them for the latest on what's happening, and we will follow the analysis here on Law and Crime. Now, when we get back, Brian's going to stay with me. I want to focus a little bit more on Arbery and that 911 phone call from Travis McMichael. Very interesting when that came out. And also, we're going to talk about the prospect of jury trials by Zoom. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back.
Shannon, are you home? Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
Chris Watts just annihilated and buried his entire family.
Chris did not take into account security cameras. He didn't watch enough CSI.
The next door neighbor is showing the surveillance footage of Chris Watts loading up his truck at 5 o'clock in the morning.
It's on video 527.
You told me that she went on a play date. He honestly thought he could fool everyone.
And welcome back, everybody. 2 weeks before Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down, Travis McMichael, one of the defendants in this case, had called 911 and said that he saw someone entering Larry English's property. Now, this is important because it is believed that Arbery was caught on camera, or was portrayed on camera, entering this property. And as we talked about at the top of the program, we also saw this new surveillance footage of multiple people entering this property as well. So I want to play this 911 phone call, and how is this going to be significant moving forward? Take a listen.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
It's Attila Drive, 230 Attila Drive.
What's going on?
We've had a string of burglaries. I was leaving the neighborhood, and I just caught a guy running into a house being built 2 houses down from me. When I turned around, he took off running into the house.
Okay. What did he look like?
It's a black male, red shirt, white shorts.
And you said the house was being built?
It's being built, yes ma'am. It's vacant right now. He is in the house.
Are you okay?
Yeah. It just startled me. When I turned around and saw him and backed up, he reached into his pocket and ran into the house. So I don't know if he's armed or not, but he looked like he was acting like he was. So, be mindful of that.
Okay.
I guess he doesn't realize we're here. He's got the damn lights on right now. He's got a flashlight looking through the house.
Does he? Okay.
He's trying to sneak behind a bush. He was coming through somebody's yard, and I looked back. And he was trying to sneak behind a bush, and when I drove on by, he got behind a portalet that they had here. And when I backed up, he looked at me. I went ahead and backed up to the road, and he reached in his pockets. I kind of watched him, and he ran off into the house, and then stepped back out and went back into the house, and that's when I called y'all.
Okay.
But we've been having a lot of burglaries and break-ins around here lately, and I had a pistol stolen January 1st, actually. And I've never seen this guy before in the neighborhood. And we've been kind of keeping an eye, and sure enough, there's one, through the yards,
Brian, we don't know who this person was that he was referring to, whether it was Arbery or not. So what do you make of this 911 phone call? How is it going to factor in moving forward into this case?
It's very interesting, Jesse. First and foremost, my mind is jumping through all the legal exceptions. If I'm the defense attorney, I'm saying this is hearsay. and there's no exception for it to come in. I don't want it to come in. The prosecution wants it to come in to try to color his mindset of this vigilante who's always on guard and ready, his deep breathing and everything that you get from there. I think it's not going to go directly to the case, but it's going to color Travis McMichael and the Mcmichaels in general as these vigilantes who are always on the ready to fight, ready to defend their property. And I don't think that's going to work well for the defense.
And let me ask you this, though. If you flip it, though, and this is a guy who arguably was pretty, excited on the phone, a little nervous. He said that things were stolen. We know that a text message came out recently where an officer had told Larry English, the property owner, if you have any problems, you can go to Gregory McMichael. And in a way, the authorities kind of emboldened these McMichaels to be the heroes of the neighborhood. I'm just making up the term here, but you understand what I'm saying. So how is that going to be factored into the defense strategy at this point?
For the defense, if I'm the defense here, based on how this case is being looked at, I don't want it in there. I think that if it is going to be there and you have to address it, then you say, hey, these are people that the police department trusted, that the community trusted, that everyone went to seek safety and protection. Would you not want this type of person in your community if something went wrong? How that might work depends really on the jury and who's willing to receive that information, though.
Brian, what are you looking out for next? We know that their defense counsel said they're looking for a preliminary hearing, for a bond hearing, ultimately for their clients to be released pending trial. What are you going to be looking out for?
So I think right now we have the structure, factually speaking, of everything we're going to know, minus maybe statements from the defendants if they testify. What I'm looking at is the next part of the investigation, and that's an investigation of the individuals who are parties in this case. What are the backgrounds of the Mcmichaels? Obviously, there's going to be what's the background of Ahmaud Arbery, but also what's the background of the officers who are involved in this case. All that information is really going to color how this investigation went down and people's motives going into this situation that ended up with the death of Ahmaud Arbery.
Yeah, and I want to ask you real quick, 30 seconds. Do you think the FBI is going to get involved? I know federal hate crimes charges might be on the table.
I think they're going to get involved insofar that they're going to investigate, but maybe I'm a little jaded. I don't think they're going to come out with hate crime charges here.
All right, well, we're going to wait and see because we do get new updates every day, sometimes every week, of what's happening in this case. Clearly, there are a lot of eyes and attention on this, and for all different kinds of reasons. It's just something to watch, I'll tell you this much, and all of it, or a lot of it, captured on footage. So, speaking of this case and all the cases that we cover, the question is, when will we see a trial? Well, here's something interesting. So, we learned that there is a Texas case that is planned to be heard, or will be heard, by a jury over Zoom. So obviously with coronavirus and COVID-19, there's a backlog of cases. What's going to happen? We know that some other states are trying to do virtual jury selection. We know that others are going to maybe hold trials remotely. And this Texas case, which is actually a civil case, it's about insurance, an insurance dispute. The jury is going to come back with a verdict over this one-day conference, a non-binding verdict. It's more of a way, I guess, to see what this jury is going to look like. How could a trial operate in a pandemic? Brian, what are your thoughts on this? Now, it might not be so much this case, because again, there's a non-binding verdict, but the idea of having jury trials over Zoom?
Yeah, it's interesting to me. I mean, something has to happen. We're going to be in a deadlock for some time. I can tell you, especially in New York City, we're not going to be having grand juries or juries anytime soon. So there's got to be something. And I think this is a good way of testing what those boundaries are, but I think there's going to be a lot of adjustments for this to apply to a criminal case anytime soon.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is it more difficult for criminal than civil?
I'm biased. I'm not sure if it's difficult. I think there's more on the line. Me personally, I think there's no number for life in prison. 50, 60, 70 million dollars. I think that pales in comparison to fighting for someone who's looking at life in prison. So I think the stakes are a little higher, and we've got to make sure we get it right if we're going to do it in a criminal case.
Well, there's two ways to look at it, right? I mean, for us, it would be great. If they could start having trials again, whether or not the jury's in a courtroom or in their homes, great, we'll cover them here. The other thing is, are these jurors going to pay attention? Are they going to research online? There's no court officers watching them. There's no judge watching them, or at least not that directly. So we're entering into a new phase, and we're going to catch up and see what ultimately happens. Brian Buckmeyer, thank you as always for coming on and giving your perspective on these cases. Everybody out there, thanks for joining us. We are going to be back Wednesday with the latest stories and the latest updates. For everyone here at Law&Crime Now, please stay safe. We'll see you then.